So we're delighted on Sancta's Showcase for Life to welcome, not in person but live from Zoom, into the studio, Brenden Thompson, the CEO of Catholic Voices, who's going to give us a fantastic insight into how to handle media, difficult questions about pro-life issues. So welcome, Brenden. It's a pleasure to have you here.
It's great to be with you, John. Yeah, always happy to help Sancta Familia, and this is a really great initiative.
You've had a very busy year yourself. You've run a successful Catholic Voices Telling the Church's Story conference in London in January. I can't believe it's 11 months ago. And you've also had some good news with a new promotion or new job. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so I brought Bishop Barron over in February to do a national evangelization conference, which went extraordinarily well after having been delayed a couple of times. But thanks be to God, it all went really successfully. And Sancta, you and Brian came over to help us to do some coverage and stuff, which was fantastic. And one of the fruits of that really has been I've been, as of late August, been hired as the UK program director for Word on Fire. So kind of developing, many people are inspired by the charism represented by Bishop Barron and Word on Fire. So just to see what's possible for mission in the UK.
That's fantastic. Really, really looking forward to see how that flourishes. Bishop Barron and the Word on Fire team do fantastic work. Of course, you've been doing great work for a long time. Can you tell us more about your organisation that you're CEO of, Catholic Voices, what they do and what's their rationale?
Yeah, sure. So, we've all been in the position, right, where someone says or implies like, oh, you're a Catholic. I'm like, well, that's a bit odd. Why do Catholics believe X, Y, and Z? And the feeling that engenders. And I would almost say, like, sometimes being pro-life is harder because it's like, oh, you believe that can really far right wing, viewpoint, or, you hate women or whatever the kind of associations are with it. So Catholic Voices was set up in a way really to try and give Catholics in particular confidence when it comes to speaking about really essential issues, often hot button issues when it comes to the church. So abortion, but also other issues related to the church. So Benedict XVI comes to the UK for a state visit, lands in Scotland, comes to England, and we train a group of lay people, say we need these people to be the sharers of the church's story, not just, let's say, professional Catholics, but actually these are skills. This is communication. This is evangelization that the laity are called to by virtue of their baptism. So in a way, it's to try and give Catholics confidence to be able to do that. So it's been going since the papal visit, about 13 years, in the media, but also in workshops.
I can't believe it's 13 years since the papal visit. I'm now feeling very old. I think you're the same age as me. I don't know if you feel similar, but it's been really, really important to have that lay voice, because in regards to hot button issues like abortion, like euthanasia, the things that are perceived as controversial, why do you think that the media home in on these hot button issues and not focus on the other softer but also equally as important issues?
Yeah, so it's an interesting question about what makes news. So I remember someone gave a definition of like, news is something that somewhere someone doesn't want something to hear about, like that you don't want to hear about something. So for us, let's say that there's, whether it's kind of like buffer zones, the conflict and the tension. Conflict is quite interesting, tension's quite interesting. So the news, in a sense, it's trying to give a sense of the pulse of culture, and often the things that do generate awareness, clicks, engagement, whatever it is these kinds of controversial issues. So often they're trying to get different perspective voices as a way of trying to understand issues, to use media language and language we use in Catholic Voices to frame an issue. Issues are quite complicated. The issue of abortion, the issue of pro-life, pro-choice, all of the views around it is quite complicated, and we need to be able to simplify it, to understand it, to behave in a particular way. So the media, when it's doing its job well, is trying to give you the different facts, the different things, the information that you need about stories as a way to understand issues simply.
So what would your advice be to, say, pro-lifers who are running a small pro-life organisation? That we have Spuck who do some basic media training with their staff, but there's other people who maybe are running a pro-life stall, running a pro-life raffle, or small scale events, and there might be interest in local media or national media. What would your advice be on approaching that topic, especially with a hostile media?
Yeah, so I think sometimes because the issue is so important, you almost want to go in on the most extreme stuff. But in a way, like, I think there's a kind of, let's say, a skilling in storytelling that's needed. So it's like, when it comes to being pro-life, what are stories that we could reasonably engage with and build a relationship with local media? So I speak to people who run local radio stations all the time. So let's say BBC Local, wherever, and they're increasingly actually being amalgamated. And this is there's a distinction between legacy media. So that's been the apostolate of Catholic media. So let's say BBC, Sky News, Al Jazeera, which, has a particular purpose. And then there's also new media, let's say. So you guys, going on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, Snapchat, whatever it is, whatever your platforms are. Now, when it comes to legacy media, it's quite an interesting opportunity to think, okay, what are some stories, like local stories, pro-life stories, like crisis pregnancy centres? What are particular, I often find, and these are one of the messages that I have in the back of my mind, is that when it comes to a worldview, people can tend to be quite pro-choice because they think that's what the nice people do. Nice people, normal, sensible people are pro-choice. But if you scratch under the surface, they tend to be pro-life in the details. So kind of pro-choice worldview, pro-life in details. But in order to have those conversations, it does require a bit of vulnerability. It's the art of learning to have a conversation. So in a sense, the last 10 years of my adult life as a Christian has been, when I came to a conversion, I was conscious that it's hard to explain. I was there just, like, say, a while ago, but it's hard to explain now what I see, that I see things so differently, that I feel things so differently. So how can I help someone to see what I see? How can I help someone to care about what I care about? And in a sense, what I can give a particular perspective. So say, like, as we say, going into media or these kind of longer forms of dialogue. But I should say probably at the start that it's really good to have a showcase for life, because there are actually lots of different types of voices. And I think we should be quite generous in a sense. Like, somebody doesn't do something the way I would necessarily do it. So sometimes we need blunter instruments. So think of John the Baptist, who was quite a blunt instrument for the kingdom of God, very, very challenging, really out there. And Jesus had that element to his ministry as well, like, Pharisees, you brood of vipers, or, changing over the money. So there's this place for that righteous anger, especially with this issue. There's also other types of communication. Like, so sometimes it's appropriate to run away. Jesus legged it when he was in, when he was in his hometown of Nazareth, and, they accused him of blasphemy. So there's lots of different types of approach. I guess the type of approach that I'm advocating, or the results of it that you might see in the media, or I train people to do, is saying, okay, what is the result of a kind of deep listening and the insights? How can it make our communication more persuasive? So the ultimate goal is actually, I want to try and persuade someone.
Yeah, as I was saying, there is not this binary choice of you're pro-life, you're pro-abortion. There's a kind of, as some of my colleagues say, there's a mountain in the middle where the majority of people, as you referred to there and touched upon, are somewhat lukewarm on the issue, somewhat in favour, somewhat against. One of the great outreaches of SPUC and the things that they do is something called Project Truth. We've heard about that today. They go out onto the streets and they just discuss the development of the baby in the womb. So it's not the hard issues, it's just simple scientific facts. So you're talking about what a baby's like at 12 weeks, what it's like at 16 weeks, 24 weeks, and just discussing those issues. One of the things I see about the pro-life issue is that there's two elements to it. We as Catholics have a spiritual view of it. The vast majority of people don't have a faith, we would say, or don't practice a faith. How do we convince them from not just a spiritual point of view, but even the scientific point of view, because we have a scientific understanding of when life begins?
Yeah, so I think the thing I like about Project Truth is that there's an opportunity mindset to it. So if you never think that you're going to be able to talk about it, you won't, because you'll never see opportunities. It's, it's like the red car theory, right? How many red cars did you see on the way to work? Well, if you weren't counting, you saw none. But if I could give you £100, I'm sure you'd see them, you'd be able to tell me with quite a lot of accuracy. And often when it comes to this issue, we need to expand our toolkit and our creativity and the things that we can speak about. So sometimes, often in television programs, there are quite pro-life themes. It's like, oh, did you see that show? what did you think of it? Well, actually, the thing I thought about is very interesting. We need to find excuses almost to have a conversation. And as you say, it's not necessarily when we're doing Catholic Voices, we're trying to find common ground. There's no dialogue without common ground. And in a sense, I want to begin with the values, or at least begin with a value that another person, what is it behind what they're saying? What can I appeal to in what they're saying to start there? Because if there's no common ground, there's no dialogue. So I'm not going to use the Bible. I'm not going to use the catechism. I'm not going to use the tradition. Where it's appropriate, I will. But if it's not a point of commonality, particularly with the abortion issue, there is so much different scientific, biological, cultural data and stories. It's more often than not, it's like, how can we find excuses to share stories about this? And a story looks different. It's not just like a beginning, middle, and end. Sometimes there's a story that's told with a particular fact or statistic, around prenatal care or antenatal or postnatal care, or experiences of somebody going and having an abortion or something like that. So we need to become conveyors or better at being storytellers in lots of different ways, I'd say.
One of the things that's interesting about the reaction to holding a pro-life view is there's this extreme element, you could say, who will never accept any hint of change or movement or even adaptability on the pro-life issue. We've seen a few examples of it this year, which I'll get into. But even the smallest things that the SPC do, for example, like the Alma Mater Fund, which is on the surface a fantastic help to pregnant and parenting students, to help them get through a degree whilst being pregnant and having that choice. There's some opposition to that as well, who see that as having an agenda to promote this pro-birth ideology that's used by the other side in this debate. But even more sinister, you might have noticed a difference in the last 12 years of being with Catholic Voices. Has there been a shift where we're seeing, as we've heard today from some of our guests, real cancel culture? Come to my mind is the candidate for the SNP leadership, Kate Forbes, who we'll hear from after yourself. Kate was vilified for holding Christian views. They weren't explicitly pro-life views, but they were Christian views, and the press refused to see anything beyond her Christian faith and how that coloured her campaign. So do you think it's getting harder these days with this growing increase of cancel culture?
Stories and narratives change, right? So what could have been in previous generations regarded as abortion is kind of unfortunate, so we want it to be safe, legal, and rare. That could represent a previous viewpoint. But that's not, generally speaking, the viewpoint now. The viewpoint is more like abortion is healthcare. So this is, we need to notice that shift. So if abortion is healthcare, it's not something that's a kind of, you're feeling reluctant about. It's actually something to fight on behalf of, because you see that there's people being marginalized and it's a human right. And so in a sense, as there's that, it becomes in a sense, an ideological banner or a weapon, in a sense. So I do see that. And I guess, in a sense, cancel culture, because it's a fascinating one about cancel culture, because free speech does need to come with a corresponding sense of responsibility, right? So you can't just say whatever you want. I think that we all believe in limits of free speech to one regard. But I think this sense of anything that makes people slightly uncomfortable. So it's like it's gone to the opposite extreme, a kind of mollycoddling, which actually makes, so one of the difficulties, I would say, actually, which is why we need a kind of opportunity mindset, is that it's considered beyond the pale. So it's actually like, this isn't a normal part of conversation. This is far right, or it's very extremist kind of to even entertain the conversation. So in a sense, that's why we need to be more, in a sense, subtle, intelligent, clever, as well as sometimes, and I guess for other voices, and I agree that other voices do need to be a bit more, in a sense, more bold, a bit more radical, a bit more. So we need those mixture of voices doing those things simultaneously. And when it comes to someone like Kate Forbes, let's say on the political dimension, she's coming after the watershed moment that was Tim Farron, right? Who got this article. So asking people about their kind of deeply held religious convictions. It's funny because I think in that case, it was possible for Kate Forbes to be in a political party and not really have spoken about faith. Like many people, you can, faith lives in a kind of hermetically sealed, element, and so can this kind of view. It just lives there. It's like, oh, it's okay as long as it's very inert and it lives there and it doesn't do anything. So it's the distinction. So in a sense that I actually think it's probably a bit more honest that it did come up in conversation of saying like because it implies who you are and your beliefs do actually affect your leadership, which is right. We just think it's going to be affecting it for a good reason, not a bad reason. So I generally agree that some of the things underneath cancel culture, the sense of the integrity of living, I can run with and say that I don't think it's a reason to kind of cancel, because, in doing that, we actually kill a pluralist culture. It's like, we're kind of fighting for, and the majority of pro-life people, it's not like they're trying to eradicate, in a sense, like who is the side trying to eradicate difference or eradicate difference of views? And it's not the pro-life side.
Absolutely, that's very salient points. We're going to be hearing from Kate Forbes after yourself, and she'll be reflecting on the campaign and what it was like to face that barrage of criticism. But what gave us hope, Brenden, was the fact that this is not a party political broadcast for the SNP or Kate Forbes, but in terms of a candidate with a deeply held Christian view, that she came so close to winning the leadership debate. I think it was something like 2,000 votes against Shumza Yusuf. So it gives us hope in the Catholic world, the pro-life world, that those views, although a silent majority or a maybe vocal minority will be abusive and shout out and try and cancel you down, the silent majority will, at the end of the day, side with you for the integrity that you've shown, despite not sharing your views. And that's the best way society should be. So thank you, Brenden, for coming on tonight on the Sancta Showcase for Life. I'm sure we'll be meeting up again and bringing you more content from your wonderful work that you do across the UK and beyond. And I hope you and your family have a wonderful Christmas when it comes. Advent is coming very soon.
Thank you so much, John. Prayers for everything you're doing, and enjoy Kate Forbes, guys. She's great.
Thanks very much. So thank you for that, Brenden. And stay tuned. And coming up soon, we'll have our interview with Kate Forbes, MSP.